All right. Thank you for joining us on this conversation. We're going to have some frank talk about the teacher rebellion happening around the world, in the U.S., in Oakland. And this is Alex. I'm here with Shane.
Hello.
And Gerald.
Hi.
Two longtime public education activists, revolutionaries, educators, and much more. So let's start off with a little context. So why is public education important to defend? I mean, a lot of people have critiques of public education. It has a, history of people feeling underserved or not served or racism within the schools. But let's start with a little context. Why is public education important?
Well, first of all, what existed for the working people before there was public education? And the answer is nothing, or the Catholic Church schools. So you was learning that the earth was flat, and all this kind of madness. Yeah, in school, okay? So fortunately, as the workers became a stronger class in modern society, one of the first things that they started to raise was the banner of education for the young people, for their children.
Gerald, are you talking about workers in the U.S. and Europe?
Well, actually, it started in England. The U.S., actually, the working class in the U.S. was very weak. But in England, there was something called the Chartist movement, and they indeed made the fight for public education a major priority.
Right on. So that's in Europe. So public education and the workers' movement, labor movement, unions have gone hand in hand since, the 19th century?
Yes, that's 1834, around them was. But then it came to the United States in a very interesting way. This is Black History Month. Da-da-da-da. Well, guess what? In this country, the major advocates for public education, and this is something that unfortunately is not discussed often enough, were the black freed slaves during Reconstruction. After the Civil War, black slaves, former black slaves, understood the importance of being able to read. And they led that fight for America. And it became, something that was available to all Americans.
Yeah. Du Bois writes in Black Reconstruction about the public school, right? There's a whole chapter dedicated to it.
That's correct.
Yeah, so seems like it's clear there's an important class struggle and racial justice dimension to public education. So that's a very general context, but what's the more current situation? What's going on right now?
Well, to be perfectly honest, what we see going on is that there is a decline of capitalism internationally. In fact, many call this the epoch of imperialist decay. You can see it by the deindustrialization and loss of jobs that have taken place in this country. And so you got to wonder, well, what is the rich and the crazy rich? I'm talking the billionaire. They're going to have trillionaires in a little while. What do they do with their money? They want to invest it in something, and they're looking around. They can't put it in auto. No, they don't want to build steel factories. So they want to invest it somewhere, and they've gotten this demented idea that public education can be an area for investment, for capitalist investment. And there has thus been the push for the privatization of our public schools.
So in other words, you're saying that, post World War II, in the 50s and 60s and 70s for sure, there's just a general decline of manufacturing, a general decline of the expansion of, industrial jobs in the United States, but really around the world in the sort of the centers of capitalism, and that they've been searching for other types of profitable outlets for investment.
Exactly.
They've been looking to cut back on the sort of the social wage, so to speak, the public services that are provided through the state, the welfare state.
Exactly. And in fact, you're going to see there have been areas of this country, I'm not talking about, let's stay right here, where they privatize the water. Water usually is a public, you pay a bill, but it's not for profit. They done privatize the water in some cities in America. This is a catastrophe. And by the way, we're going to stop them. We are going to win.
Yeah, we got some really exciting developments in the class struggle, and that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of this segment. Shane, you want to chime in on this? Anything about public education being privatized? Anything about your own experiences? You worked at a charter school, right, for a while?
I did. I've worked at a few charter schools here in the Bay Area. The first one was a KIPP school, KIPP standing for Knowledge is Power program. They're one of the largest charter school organizations in the country. I believe they have well over 100 schools, mostly middle and high school. I don't think they have any elementary schools.
Shane, before you go into your experience with that, can you talk a little bit just in general? What's up with charter schools for people who maybe are thinking about, they admit a lot of students. They're sort of like public schools. Can you say a little bit about that and then speak about your experience?
Okay, sorry. So charter schools are, kind of being currently are very misleading because they are often described as public schools. They do serve public school students, and however, the difference being that they are not democratically ran. They are ran by private boards, usually aligned with some corporate foundations or billionaire money, for instance, Gates or Eli Broad or the Waltons, the Walmart. So there's kind of where, it's kind of like, the hybrid of between actual public schools, which are democratically ran, and private schools. And currently they're playing, kind of a medium, the medium towards full privatization in one way or another.
Yeah, it seems like because charter schools, a lot of them, they still get some public money, right? They get average daily attendance, ADA.
They get the same ADA as public schools.
So I think.
Wait, what is ADA? Explain that to folks, because I don't know if everybody understands that.
Well, Alex, just the average daily attendance. So schools get a certain amount per student daily attendance.
And so I think a lot of people are, say, well, if the school doesn't cost money, if the charter school doesn't cost any tuition for my student to attend, and it's getting public money, well, it's a public school then, right? But you emphasize, Shane, that there's this private governance part. They have appointed boards often that run things, and each school or each little mini school district, if they have a chain, will have its own board, as opposed to being really run and governed through the centralized school board, which seems like it makes it harder for teachers, families, students to air their grievances, to have a space to protest, etc.
There's no grievance. If you don't like the program, get gone. Look, they don't even serve disabled children, for instance. If you got a serious disability, they will put you out. It's hard to believe that we allow this type of functioning in something calling itself an educational institution.
Yeah, the fact-finding report that came out, which was a report about the bargaining between the Oakland Education Association Teachers Union and the Oakland Unified School District, had a really good, the first, I think, 5 pages or so had a really good argument looking at how charter schools don't systematically serve special ed students. Some of them might here and there, but on the whole, even in Oakland on the whole, they don't serve them, which then contributes toward a sort of a tracking system between the charter districts and the public school districts. So it's important to point out charter schools are private schools.
Or a transition to them, you know what I mean? Because you don't necessarily pay to go to a charter school, but you are standing at the edge of the abyss. Because once all of the schools, like they are in New Orleans, the last public school just closed down in New Orleans. Once all the schools become charter, it's only a small step to making people pay to send their children to school.
Right, and I think in the large broader context, some very important points to make about the charter school industry is that it's currently being dominated by 1 billionaires. in corporate foundations, but also the movement is receiving bipartisan support from both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And that's important because here in California, where the Democrats have had a supermajority for quite a few years, the charter school laws are extremely favorable. There's Prop 39, which allows charter schools to claim unused public school space. So here we have the context for all of these public school closures, of which in Oakland Unified, the district I work for, they're currently slated to close 24 public schools over the next 5 years.
Right. Yeah, and we'll come back to a little bit of the Oakland specific issues, given that the Oakland teachers right now are leading the charge on challenging privatization. But this is also a global phenomenon. This is not just a Bay Area or a even United States issue, but rather a global issue. You have privatization happening in Mexico and Puerto Rico and all parts of Europe, where state debts, such as the ones in Puerto Rico, for instance, get used as a context to basically gut the public sector. And
Exactly.
not only that, but also as a pretext to destroy labor unions, teachers unions in particular, in order to fundamentally just pay lower wages and be able to control the workforce a little bit more. And I think we haven't even mentioned how, in addition to sort of being an avenue for investment, these charter schools and the neoliberal privatization scheme as a whole is also just trying to discipline a new generation of workers.
That's it.
Say a little bit about that, Gerald.
Well, see, before you can read the history of the working class and understand the destiny of the working class, you have to be able to read. And I'm telling you, man, we are in trouble. Because the first thing they did was make many of our public schools, particularly in the Black and Latino areas, dysfunctional. So it alienates the parents and the community from the, because you say, well, hell, we send them to school and they ain't learning nothing. People graduate illiterate. So people say, well, it ain't worth nothing. It ain't worth fighting for. I don't care what they do. Well, that's a mistake. We have to take what we have, defend it. We have to nurture it. We have to bring it back to life, but we don't want to walk away in despair. Fight for our future.
Yeah, and that's part of the exciting possibility that's present right now, where, yeah, there are problems in public schools for sure, in large part due to the historic underfunding. You had Prop 13. I don't know if one of you guys want to speak about that a little bit.
Okay, Proposition 13 was a proposition that was passed in the 70s, and they exploited the fact that the property taxes kept going up because the politicians kept voting to take those property taxes up. So you had, for instance, senior citizens who owned a home, but the property taxes got so high they couldn't live in their own houses anymore. So somebody came up with the idea, and this was certainly corporate, that we're going to stop the raising of any property tax. And Americans, lacking any class consciousness or any revolutionary leadership or any leadership worthy of the term at all, voted for it, and it became state law. Well, what happened was the corporations and the developers and the people, the landlords, they didn't have to raise their property taxes either. So what this led to is the closing down of libraries and it's nothing legitimate about it, but along with that, the loss of funds sent to our various public schools. So today we're having, in my opinion, that is my opinion, labor misleaders try to say, well, what we really need to do is to change the law and Proposition 13. And then once we change that law and start taxing the corporations, everything is gonna be all right. No, it ain't. Not without the right leadership, not without your concern, not without class-conscious teachers fighting back, not without a community that is aware that it has to pay attention to this vital matter.
And I think also in general, like California before Prop 13 was one of the top states as far as the spending on education and in general public education. You know, the success rates, and after Prop 13, it is now down. You know, and continuously declined into the 40s. Correct.
Sick.
Yeah. So let's pull back a little bit too. So that's part of the context here in California. But we've seen teachers revolt across the country, right? West Virginia was a huge breakthrough.
Oh yeah. Now wait, y'all look here. Y'all about to get me going on here because we were talking about the charter schools before. Well, guess what? Not only did the West Virginian so-called red state teachers go out on strike to defend public education and to fight for health care. They was trying to take away your health care. The teacher got to come to work sick. But listen, they just went back on strike because while they thought the teachers were napping, the reactionary legislature in West Virginia tried to come up with a law to introduce charter schools into the mix in West Virginia. Guess what? Them brothers and sisters said, yo, you know what? I thought we had whooped your ass and we was done with that. Well, now I guess we got to spank you some more. Shut it down. And they did. And you know what? And I'm inspired. I literally am inspired by the clarity of mind and the militancy of these teachers in West Virginia.
Yeah, I think the West Virginia was kind of where we saw really this teacher movement kind of really take off, and I think in general in West Virginia it's a little bit different than the context in California. One's a red state, one's a blue state, but it's also that it was the way it's set up in West Virginia with the right to work and whatnot is that every teacher in West Virginia is basically has to they negotiate with the state legislature rather than local school board, local school districts. So it just allowed for a very a much easier, not easier I shouldn't say, but it allowed for a statewide action rather than here where what we need to do is have a statewide action, but it's a little more difficult based on kind of there's more wealthy school districts that you have we see outside of Oakland. And then Oakland, of course, is a very, unfortunately, a district which, struggles for, funding and, struggles to stay afloat as far as, public schools go, as we see now.
Right. So West Virginia might have had some type of structural advantage in terms of developing a statewide movement. But with UTLA, we're seeing that there has been some connection between teachers on the ground in Los Angeles, in Oakland. Do you all want to speak to the UTLA strike?
Well, we're going to speak to that in 1 minute. I just want to say this. Now, this is I don't want people to get me wrong. I am an advocate of trade unions. I have benefited from trade unions my entire life. I worked longshore. I've taught school. I retired as an electrician. I worked for the Oakland Unified School District. I am an advocate of unions. Nevertheless, you got to take the bitter with the sweet. Sometimes we develop a bureaucracy that heads up our unions that becomes conservatized and that holds back our struggles. It's no way of denying this. In West Virginia, this was not a major factor. And so, even though, and everybody should know this, the West Virginia strikes were illegal. They were illegal. Them people went on strike anyway and won. Here, we have a different situation because we have a more mature CTA.
What's a CTA?
California Teachers Association. That's the bureaucracy that we're dealing with that I will make the argument maybe holding our strike back a little bit. We'll talk about that later. But they didn't have that in West Virginia. And that was another factor, I think, Shane.
Yeah, I agree with that. CTA is the state affiliate in California of the NEA. NEA, I believe, is the largest public sector union in the country with about over 4 million members.
That's right. So maybe that's a good time then to go back to UTLA then. So what happened? What's the significance of the LA strike?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of significance, and one, I was rather pleased, to be honest with you, to see how well organized it was. Remember, we're talking 30,000 teachers. Now, it's never easy to organize 30,000 people, but they were conscious from the beginning that the strike was in part political. It was not simply economic. So they included demands and won demands that were not the typical trade union demands: more money per hour, this long a vacation, you get Christmas off, that kind of stuff. I'll give you one example that just sticks out in my mind that has nothing to do with the economics on your check. One of the things that the LA teachers, the United Teachers of LA, won in their contract was that there would be no more random searches of children at high schools by the police. Now, how much money I get for that? You get nothing, but you get $1 million in terms of your dignity and the way your children feel about themselves. So winning over matters that are not traditionally contractual can be decisive in maintaining the alliance between the unions and the community.
And a big, LA is the second largest public school district in the nation. You're talking about 30,000 teachers down there that overwhelmingly voted for the strike, that participated in the vote, and also the number was up in, I believe it was 97% that actually voted yes to go on strike. So you just see like LA for many years really put all the emphasis in building up the membership, where we see now it could even be, probably more described as a member-based union rather than a service-based union, which is important, as, if you want to have strike actions and serious working class organization, that's where, you members have to believe you're going to fight for them.
So it sounds like you're alluding to the fact that UTLA has transformed to some extent. There's been a political development within UTLA, and I think the same has happened in OEA and probably in a lot of the unions. And I can't help but want to emphasize that that's been the result of a lot of work that people like you two have done over the course of the years. So, Shane, can you speak a little bit to what you know about UTLA's development?
I mean, just in general, like, they operated kind of out of a caucus. I think it was called Union Power that won the leadership of the executive board of UTLA. The president is Alex Caputo Pearl. I think in the last few years there has been, kind of more of a radical social justice based, caucus structure that has kind of, and especially in LA, they're the ones that won the membership. OEA also had, kind of maybe less, to the left, but still a very, a left, a way leftists that were, in the structure and out organizing, and then also pushing for the leadership of the executive board.
I mean, people in LA and in Oakland, I know for sure, have been doing all types of organizing and against school closures for years, for decades even, organizing with students against repressive police measures, youth curfews, closing of community centers. There's just all types of work that from my perspective, has to be seen as contributing toward the development of these really heroic strikes, because otherwise we just feel like they sort of came out of nowhere. But it's the sort of day-to-day organizing that a lot of, hundreds, if not thousands of people have put in. And within that, dozens and dozens of really committed revolutionary activists and organizers that has sort of kept that kernel of militancy alive during more, straight up reactionary times where you have conservative leaderships. And I think that's super important because, as the strike wave comes and goes, there's going to be a need to continue that work. And
Alex, you're absolutely right. And I am certainly not a person that would deny any credit to myself, the roles that I have played or anybody else. But you know what? There's something else going on. I want people to think, for instance, that you have a scale and we have roughly the same weight on both sides of the scale, but we keep dropping a grain of sand on one side, and we keep dropping a grain of sand on that same side, eventually what will happen? That scale's gonna tip. Or look at water. You're boiling the water up, right? But then at a certain point, that water starts to boil and it starts to turn into steam. And that's what's happening. The working class is steaming because we've been taking it, we've been abused for a long, long time. Yes, it's true that we have all made the maximum efforts. For instance, there was a shutdown and the occupation of Lakeview, which was something that we did, an act of desperation. But we wound up with considerable community support in that action. But what happens is you got to believe in the working people's ability to reason. They see they living just like we living. They see what's going on, and slowly but surely, they're coming on over to the point that only decisive action on their part is going to make the difference here.
That's right. So let's transition to Oakland.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start? There's the school board. I think that's one really important starting point. Yeah,
this is painful now. This hurts because I ran for school board back in 1997, and I didn't want to be a politician, but the OEA back then asked me to run. And I said, okay, if it do some good. So they said they were going to go on strike, and here I am. I'm running for school board against the Board of Education, Lucella Harris, and I had no money. I don't think we raised more than $3,500, but we had 100 supporters, almost exclusively teachers and community members, and we went out and we were running. I was running for District 3, that is West Oakland. We knocked on those doors, and you know what? People were supporting us. And if not for definite dirty tricks on the part of my opponents, which were much bigger than Lucella Harris, I come to find out, I wound up with 46.1% of the vote. That's not 51%. I lost. But for a first-timer out the box to get a substantial, number of votes like that, said something about people's desire for an alternative. People don't want to suffer. People want solutions. They're looking, they're searching, they're seeking, and they will find it if it exists. And right now, we're in a very important state where the school board basically has been bought off. That's all. I'm sorry. Jody London, District 1, when she was given $20,000 by Mr. Go Public Schools, his name is Bill Gates, right?
The Rogers Foundation, actually.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, that wasn't. So Gates gave his own money then, because he gave money too. Look, I walked into the school board meeting, the last school board meeting, when they were shutting down the school routes with signs of a picture of the school director and how much they receive from political donations from these privatization firms and nonprofits. $151,000 over here, $90,000 over here. These people are bought and paid for. It's got nothing to do with what's right or what's best for the community. Hell, oh, never mind. That's just, it's obscene, y'all. It is obscene. And the only answer to that activity on the part of our most bitter enemies is to organize. Organization is the key. It doesn't matter how much they put out and pay and co-op. If the working people decide that we've had enough of this and we decide to get behind a working class candidate that represents our interests, we can win, and we will win.
Yeah, I mean, the school board has been supported, bought off, however you want to put it, by, Go Public Schools, which, as we said, funnels money from the Rogers Family Foundation, which is the Dryer's Ice Cream.
I see.
enterprise, and they direct their money.
Make it plain,
so
brother.
they can
Break it down.
these capitalist entities, these businesses, these corporations, direct money toward their philanthropic, social good institutions, so that they can avoid taxation. It allows them to also legitimize themselves in the public eye, or at least attempt to, and then they end up getting political influence. And they've donated. I think I was looking at the East Bay Express, and there was an article about how there was almost $1 million poured into the Oakland Unified School Board race just in 2016.
Hold on, now look. Oh man, all right, I gotta get my composure here. Look I just said when I ran, we had $3,500. That was my campaign was a little poor, but even Lucella Harris's campaign, with the dirty money that she got and the hit pieces they put out on me, never exceeded $30,000. That to me, that was an outrage.
30,000 is a lot for a local school board.
You damn right. But 150?
150, mind you, that's in the latest school board election. There was one race and it was in District 4 or 5.
No, that was District 7, right?
No, Gary Yee was the.
Oh, Gary!
candidate.
No, I'm talking about the black guy.
James Harris.
James Harris has been one of the worst by far. I mean, he's taken well over $100,000 from the.
There you go.
Go Public Schools and New Schools Venture Fund, all those groups that are pouring all this money into the election. But in the most recent case, Gary Yee came out of retirement because the incumbent resigned, which she well should have, because she was useless for public education. But Gary Yee, they convinced Gary Yee, who was in retirement already. He was the interim superintendent before he retired. But anyway, they convinced him, and because I think because they were worried they were going to get beat late in the game, Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, billionaire, that's right, dumped, gave him $150,000.
Whoa!
His commercial, the opening night of the NBA season, when the Warriors were taking on, I don't even know who it was. His commercial was on opening night for his candidates for school board.
Damn. So we clearly have a problem. I don't think we need to spend any more time talking about the fact that these fools are bought off hardcore, and also just straight up opportunists who are trying to climb up the political ladder, become city council people, become governor. Who knows? These people have big aspirations for their political lives. But Gerald, you mentioned that there needs to be a class conscious slate of people that get these people out of the school board. And I think that striking teachers right now, parents and students who are doing actions in solidarity, community members need to be thinking about who's the right candidate, who's been doing work in who are the right candidates who can form an alliance and really build off of the energy of this strike and take over the board.
Well, look, you got to look at it this way. This strike is not a one-off apocalypse. This strike is a step in the right direction. This strike is a step towards building the ongoing alliance between the teachers union and the community.
That's right.
As a result of that alliance, one of the things we have to do is we need to have a political side to it and meet and confer and select people to run for office. It's not going to change in one day, I'm sorry to say, because election stuff is rough. It's hard to pick people and select people that will stay with it and that won't sell out,
Yep.
So, and people have to be trained and educated. So it's going to take some time. But we have gone down the right road. And if we continue down this road, organization being the key, we will establish, I think, a permanent organization that selects future candidates to represent the working people here in Oakland in terms of the school board.
That's right. And part of that correct road that we're walking down has involved the tireless work that teachers have done to build alliances with parents. I mean, that parents have done to create parent organizations that have helped build these strike schools. So can we talk a little bit about the sort of community worker alliances that have been happening in the lead up to this strike and that are happening right now on the ground with these strike solidarity schools?
Okay. I have been working with a group called the DSA, and one very positive thing that they did early on is we established a committee out in East Oakland. And the aim of this committee was to contact the parents and the teachers and to have pro-strike house meetings so that the workers could understand why the teachers were going on strike. So what this basically entailed was this. We would contact the rep, contact the union, get to know who the rep was for a school. Let's say Parker was one of our schools. And we go talk to the rep, go to the school in the morning when people dropping off their kids, and in the evening when they pick them up. And you know what was really rewarding was that people wanted to talk to us even though they kind of halfway want to get to work. They halfway want to go home. They really trying to leave, but there's another side to them that wanted to tip in and listen. And actually they agreed with us. And it would become very clear that this was going to be a popular strike. We also canvassed the periphery of the schools, Burkhalter, Markham, and Parker. Those are the schools I participated in. And then we also, when we had the parent meetings, actually there was a parent rally at Markham. The parents organized a rally to support the strike. That's when you know you're doing the right thing. But then lastly, but what the parents did say in the meeting before that rally was that they supported the strike, but if there wasn't no place for their kids to go, they was going to bring them to school. So I said, all right, that's contradictory, but you know what? That's a challenge. That's a challenge. People got to live. People are not going to stop working because we go on strike. So what we did was we started the solidarity schools. We started appealing, and this is where you know that the strike is deep, that the support for the strike is deep, because people everywhere we went, not everywhere, somewhere we went, they opened the doors and they closed the doors. So that's churches that are tied up with all the banks and all of that stuff. They pulled out. But most of the places we went opened the doors unreservedly to us, and that shows you the deep support in our community. I was on the negotiating team to get Full Gospel to be one of our solidarity locations, and it worked. And it's a beautiful, giant place, you know, and we have a staff composed of teachers that are in place, ready to serve these children when they show up. It's looking up. We're looking real good. Now the question is, how long do we have to keep this going?
Right. So the strike is popular right now. That's important. People clearly know that the teachers are working hard and are completely underpaid, and it seems like people are also pretty clear that, like the slogan says, the teachers' working conditions are the students' learning conditions.
Yes.
So that's
Absolutely.
clear to people. But we want to be, we're excited about this, and part of that excitement requires us to be sober and also thoughtful about what some of the potential difficulties are. So what are some of these difficulties? It seems like one of them is that, without wanting to sound like a wet blanket, is that the CTA, the California Teachers Association, has historically played, a problematic, let's say, role with regard to developing insurgent labor movement,
Well, there's two things we have to deal with here. Along our road to human liberation, the working class is going to step into potholes and trip and fall. We're going to run out of gas sometimes. And sometimes there are going to be obstacles in that road that we have to overcome. Earlier in our broadcast, we talked about historically the general conservatizing role that trade union bureaucracies can play on intense social struggle and strikes. And so just understanding that that's a phenomenon that we have to deal with. It's nothing new. You know, it's not a wet blanket. It's part of the reality.
And it's not a personal thing.
That's right. Now, so there's two problems here. Number one, along that road to human liberation, the class tries to unite itself because that is everybody knows there's strength in unity. When we stand together, no one can stop us. And so that tendency to come together means that different sectors of the working class want to come into that struggle and actually participate in it. So I was fortunate enough to accompany teachers to 2 trade union meetings in search of solidarity. We went to the International Longshoremen and Warehousemen's Union, Local 34, which is the clerks, and we're fortunate enough that the clerks voted to honor the teachers' picket lines. Now, what does that mean? If you honor the teachers' picket line, that means if the teachers set up a picket line on the waterfront, potentially no one will go to work, which means the waterfront would be shut down.
And by no one, you mean the longshore workers, correct?
That is correct. Now, I have to say, this is where the CTA played a really bad role. When we were planning now we've got this mandate from the waterfront workers that they're ready to work with us. Mm-hmm. What I propose, well, not just me. So let's say I'm not, like the big cheese around here. I'm just one of a team. I work with people. I run with people. And we propose that the teachers get out there at 6 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday, and set up those picket lines. And given the fact that the workers have decided to honor the picket lines, the longshoremen would honor the picket line. You imagine a guy shows up to work and maybe he missed the meeting, so he doesn't know. So what does he do? He calls his business agent. He says, "Hey, come on, there's some guys here with some signs. What's up?" The business agent will then say, "All right, look, no work today. That's it. We're honoring their picket line. Waterfront shut down." What does the CTA do? The CTA recommended that the teachers show up at 12 o'clock and have a rally. So they wanted to take what is a concrete act of class solidarity and turn it into a painless,
symbolic.
Right.
Just a symbolic rally.
That's it.
Why though? Because if you come and set up a picket line when they're already at work, then they're not going to come out from work and join your picket line.
Right.
But if you set up your picket line at the shift change when the workers are coming, that's when your picket line will be honored. You'll shut down the waterfront and the circulation of capital, which is important.
Well, we are trying to recoup, and it looks like, Shane. Now this is where I insist that I thought at the cluster, the majority voted to show up at 4 to stop the night shift, and which would be better than nothing. It's best, of course, if we start with the day shift, but the night shift would be good, better than nothing. But Shane informs me that there was no formal vote taken. But it looked like to me people were clear about showing up at 4 o'clock. What did you say, Shane?
Yeah, so the meeting Gerald was talking about was every day after the strike day, they hold, each site has a picket captain. The picket captains converge, down in West Oakland for a daily debriefing. And at that, it was clarified by the teachers, the reps are usually the picket captain. But anyway, that the action should be a actual picket at shift change, not a rally at 12 o'clock. And that's what, was clarified for everybody in that room. I mean, obviously, but the problem was that that's not an official like rep council meeting where we take new business and actually vote on it. It's just a debriefing.
Yeah, a debriefing is in front of the most militant and consistent workers in the union.
Correct.
I look at that as the secondary leadership, and I was very hopeful because of that. So that's one thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, just one thing I want to say about that point around the secondary leadership is that I think that what has to be clear is that the CTA has a strong alliance with the Democratic Party on a state level. And it would make sense that if you might want teachers to go on strike, but you don't want things to get too crazy. You don't want them, if you're the CTA, you don't want them to.
I'm about to jump on you, bro.
You don't want them to go and talk with the longshoremen and do anything that directly impacts the political economy of the Bay Area, such as shut down the port, shut down the waterfront. So I think that people have to be clear on why the CTA does act as a wet blanket in these kind of situations. I mean, there's people who do good work in CTA as individuals, but as a political institution, that's the sort of their role, is to keep things contained. And one way that I've noticed that is even in the way the bargaining committee is spoken about. There's speeches on the mic about the bargaining committee is feeling the power of the workers. You're giving them, you guys, striking workers, are giving the bargaining committee confidence to bargain for what you need. This makes it seem like the bargaining committee is this autonomous agent that's somehow separate from the rank and file. The bargaining committee is supposed to be an expression of the rank and file leadership, not this sort of like separate thing, but its separateness is part of the influence that CTA has.
Yeah, well, you want to know something? You done hit it bingo, because fellow workers, beware. What may seem like an autonomous body in the beginning of the struggle can very quickly become a lapdog for the Oakland Unified School District. We don't want a separation of the negotiating committee from, in fact, years ago, it was not uncommon for negotiations in healthy unions to be open public affairs. You could come in, you couldn't talk, but you could come in and watch what was going on.
Watch the negotiations?
Exactly. Why not? It's your future.
What do you have to hide?
That's right. So this came up. Now Shane is going to have to take over here, because this came up in the meeting. And I remember good militants getting up and saying that they were apprehensive about the prospect of the negotiating committee making an agreement and then coming to the membership with a tentative agreement. And when they come to the membership with the tentative agreement, bro, in my opinion, this is my opinion, it's over. Because when they got that tentative agreement, people going to tend to want to vote for it and go back. Shane, what say ye?
No, I completely agree. I think what we face is, people who have, been, organizing in OEA, which is Oakland's union, know and have the recent experience of, the leadership bringing a tentative agreement, which is, fairly moderate, and is not something essentially that, you would, as kind of more of a left, if you're in a left caucus or more of social justice, you wouldn't vote for that. You would say, let's, get them continue bargaining. And especially in this context, it's 100% correct that CTA will likely be trying to play the role of let's get everybody back to work with a tentative agreement. And
warning.
And it was brought up at the meeting that teachers were a little bit wary and a little bit nervous about the line that, they're going to be bargaining all weekend, 12 24-hour bargaining sessions, and to the point where they're just beat down and just say, here, let's just come up with anything and get it back to the membership. And that's where in the past that the leadership of the union would 100% try to advocate for a yes vote. I don't know in this context, because the executive board definitely has a little bit more of a radical left presence on it in OEA now. So I think we can expect a tentative agreement to come, but I personally know that people are set to start a no campaign if it's a typical tentative agreement that's not what we're looking for. And it should be said also, with 24 public schools slated to close, if that is not part of this tentative agreement, I know for a fact that many of the folks that come down for those meetings after the strike days are going to be pissed, and they're going to be trying to vote, convince people to vote no.
Yeah, you know what though? This is not, I repeat, this is not gloom and doom. This is not a wet blanket. This is a warning to the best elements in the OEA. Watch your back. Because we have, while we certainly do have a CTA element trying to rush people back to work, we also have an emerging opposition, I think.
That's right.
To that sellout. I've heard people talking about starting a no-vote campaign. So we'll see what happens, but understand, what happens depends on all of these young, they're not all young, they're grown people, but the people that have come into this struggle and are now, their consciousness is growing by leaps and bounds. And also, many people like Brother Shane that have prior experience in this struggle. People look back now and say, well, he's been raising hell for 10 years now. Maybe I think I'll give him a listen. Mm-hmm. Maybe I think I'll vote for him for executive board. Maybe I think he was right all along. So now is the time, this is a challenge. This is not a defeat. This is nothing to get on your knees and start sniveling about. Now's the time to fight back, to find the courage, to step up and prevent any sellout of this strike. And that starts with demanding your rights to read your contract before you vote on it.
That's right. I know people had some critiques about how in LA, which clearly was a really historic and important strike, even there was kind of a rush to vote quickly. Someone told me recently that there was 22% of the employees, the workers, who voted no on it even. So I think that there's even some things in that contract that are worth critiquing. But I think you're right, Gerald. This is a really important moment because there is an increasingly large layer of educators, workers, teachers, parents, students who are coming to the fore, becoming incredibly active, doing really important organizing, and we salute all of them. And it seems like that one key thing that, before we wrap up, that is worth mentioning is that the independent action that teachers took at schools like Oakland High, Skyline, Fremont High, a month or so ago during the sick-outs, from my perspective, seemed like contributed to a turning point where there was a lot of public support that came out for these sort of independent actions that were wildcat actions. They were not sanctioned by the union. They were a few hundred teachers, but they were really important because of the risks that these teachers took. And those risks that they took and the powerful demonstrations that they had during the school days, going on a little wildcat sick out, I think contributed to turning the tide of public opinion in support of the teachers. And I think there's a lesson in that for this moment where the strike is an official strike, but there's still room for independent self-activity by rank and file workers, educators, parents, etc. And in the context of school closures, attacks on librarians, etc., it seems like there needs to be an opening to that, of independent action and doing things that go beyond even the I don't want to say confines, but even beyond the structure of a really important and historic strike. So with that being said, what are the next steps?
Step one is for, I think, Shane say the cluster K vote. Well, that's too bad because it looked like the cluster was bubbling.
So just for the clusters at this point, Oakland is divided. Oakland Unified School District is divided into 7 districts. So we are also, the union, OEA, also has divided up into what's known as clusters. And so each district has a cluster, and the cluster is the cluster of school sites within that district. I am a member of Cluster 7 in Deep East Oakland. And so there you see, kind of the rank and file activity that is desperately needed in the context of a strike. Our cluster meets every weekend, and that's how we wind up motivating the vote on no school closures, to add no public school closures as a fourth core demand of our bargaining. So that's that's for me, the rank and file activity has been the strength of our strike, and it will continue to be the strength of our strike, and that's who will have to be fighting the influence of CTA and our executive board, which will no doubt be have CTA in their ear, but we have to be in their other ear much more louder and much more present.
That's right.
Now look, brothers and sisters, understand this. We're faced with a situation where everything is not of our choosing. You have to dig down and find the courage to tell the truth to the community, to your fellow workers. Trust yourself. Believe in yourself, because you are right. Those people who want decent schools for our children are our leaders. Those who fake and hesitate and try to be obstacles are our enemies. Let's call it like it is, and let's win.
All right. Thank you guys for the conversation.
Trouble is very dangerous.